to get home.
Okay.
I'll take back roads when I come up. So.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Phoenixville Library, and welcome to those on Zoom to Phoenixville Library and our presentation tonight that's serving a number of purposes. This is part of our series called Community Gardening Around the Village, in which we've been partnering for the last several years with local organizations like Phoenixville Area Community Services, the Phoenixville Green Team, the hospital, Trellis for Tomorrow, Phoenixville Communities That Care, the Chester County Food Bank, and other local organizations. And this is also a tie-in to the Longwood Gardens Community Read, something that they do every year, and which we've been partnering with every year that they've been doing it. And the book that they are encouraging adults to read this year is The Last Garden in England, which I'm almost finished. So you can find out more information about the Community Read on Longwood Gardens website. And
are you going to be doing a discussion of that book here?
we are, but I wasn't even going to talk about that tonight, but see me later. Anybody who has come in to the room and on Zoom, if you are interested in the drawing that we are conducting for a family pass to Longwood Gardens, please on Zoom put your name and email address in the chat. If you are in the room and are interested in the drawing, there are tickets on the table over here. You can put your name and phone number on and drop it into the box. I'll probably be drawing the winners tomorrow. Okay. We are pleased to have with us tonight Olivia Kirkpatrick, who is a designer at GreenWeaver Landscapes. She's worked in public gardens for several years before she returned to landscape design with a renewed interest in landscape management and sustainability. She has a degree in landscape architecture from the University of Delaware, and she's going to give us an intro to landscape design tonight. So Olivia, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're just going to hope that technology plays with us. Anytime I do a presentation, I'm like, I back it up like 40 times, and I save the PDF and the PowerPoint and all that. So, as we just said, tonight my talk's going to be on an introduction to landscape design, which actually feels like a really huge topic for me because it's what I do professionally, and it's what I studied, and it's what I love to do. So I had to kind of condense it down. So my kind of goal for tonight was to talk about landscape design, sort of geared a little bit more toward residential clients and geared toward homeowners, sort of the things that you can do yourself and the process if you want to get involved in landscape design for your own property or other properties, and also what it might look like to work with a professional, because not everyone has done that before. And I think there's a place for both. I think obviously this is my career field, and I've worked really hard, and I've designed a ton of different properties and done all different kinds of work, but I don't think it has to be an inaccessible thing for a homeowner. I think there's a lot that you can do, even if it's just understanding your own property better. So again, technology, maybe that was the font I picked. Futura was not the right decision. So I'm just going to talk a tiny bit about myself so you can understand me better and my background and how I'm approaching this topic. So I'm a landscape designer at GreenWeaver Landscapes. We're a design, build, maintain firm in Media, Pennsylvania. Our focus is, we have sort of three core tenets. So we're focused on the planet, we're focused on people, and we're focused on quality. So we focus a lot on native plants and sustainable gardens, sustainable stormwater management. Looking at your whole property holistically. We're really focused on people, which is one of the reasons why I love working there. Today was our orientation for all of our staff, and we did a 30-minute yoga break, and one of our staff taught yoga. So if I look like I sweated in this outfit, it's because I was outside this morning doing yoga. So it's important to us not just to work with our clients, but also to take really good care of our people. I can say, as an employee myself, we have a really good benefit package. Our employees are getting fair wages. We try really hard to keep even our crews employed during the winter. A lot of time, horticulture and landscape work is seasonal, but if we can keep people on and they want to stay on, everyone always puts in an effort to make that happen. Whether that's me selling a lot of designs and working really hard to make sure we have work that we can do over the winter, or doing snow removal or things like that just to keep our crews busy. And then quality is sort of our other core tenet there. And again, the goal is when we finish a project, we're leaving no stone unturned, everything is done right. If we made a mistake or we can improve on something, we're always gonna make an effort to do that. So a little bit about me. As we mentioned, I have a bachelor's of landscape architecture from the University of Delaware. I was in their second graduating class. Kind of feels like I was the first because the first graduating class was one person. They had a landscape horticulture and design major, and when I started at UD in 2014, that was my major, and they added a landscape architecture program. They became accredited the year after I graduated, so I was grandfathered into that. And I'm on their professional advisory board now, and I have worked on some of their hiring committees, trying to keep that program really vigorous. They've met all of their goals, essentially, for that program, which is really amazing. I could talk about UD forever. Really proud of their program. So some of my past work experience, again, I've taken a little bit, I think everyone in this field has taken kind of a circuitous route to get where they are. There's so many different interests that you can explore. So some of my past work experience, I was the rhododendron gardener at the Tyler Arboretum. That was managing about 15 acres. What was it? 1,500 plants, 500 different species or cultivars. So it's a really big collection, so it was not just managing that collection itself, but also the landscape around it. So that was like, getting in there. A lot of what I did was like hauling sticks. Just their whole canopy was full of poplars, so there's a lot of me carrying sticks around. I worked as a plant records assistant at the Mount Cuba Center. That again was kind of a pivot for me. It was a job listing that looked interesting, and I said, I've never done records before, but this sounds amazing. And mercifully, I got that job and I learned so much. So that was kind of helping them manage their living collection, managing those records. All of their plants are accessioned and tagged, so you can look them up. They're in a map, they're in a database, which for an organization like that is really important. Right after I graduated, I worked as a post-occupancy research intern, so I was looking at a landscape architecture firm's previous projects and seeing how successful they were. I also worked as a contract landscape designer. When I was still in school, I was working as a landscape designer for one of my professor's companies. So again, I feel like I've had a pretty diverse experience. I think the management has contributed a lot to what I see as important in design, which is making sure that something is going to be successful by looking at maintenance and what management looks like before it even gets in the ground. So, what are we going to discuss today? Keep myself on track. If you see me getting too far, somebody raise a hand. So what is landscape design? Why should you design your landscape? Why is landscape design important? What does the design process look like? And then I wanted to, again, kind of address these two different ways of looking at landscape design. So whether that's designing your own landscape or hiring a professional and knowing what that line might be, you can explore that for yourself too. So this is the Olivia definition. If you quote it, give me credit, because I made it up, because I was trying to think about, again, landscape design is kind of in the name. We design landscapes. But to me, it feels a lot bigger than that. So the definition that I wrote, based on my own ethos, and the ethos of all the people that I've worked with, was landscape design is designing beautiful, functional outdoor spaces and environments that benefit not just the immediate user, but also your larger community. So all of your human and non-human neighbors. It's making sure the stream in your backyard is protected. It's making sure that you're not sending stormwater into your next door neighbor's yard because you didn't feel like dealing with it. It's creating an environment for endangered monarch butterflies. All of these things are so important, and I think that's, for myself and for a lot of designers, that is just like a part of what we do. And then this kind of ties into something I'm going to talk about later, but it integrates the needs of the site, so the space you're working with, and the needs of the user. And those two things go hand in hand, and they have to work together. So what might landscape design look like? It can look like a lot of things. So almost all of these are examples of my work because it felt like cheating to include other people's work. So it might be whole property design. So this is a client of mine. It's a young family. They just moved into this property and it wasn't working for them. The people who lived there previously had their landscape and had what worked for them. And so we took a look at the whole property holistically. So in their case, it was managing stormwater on the property. It was creating spaces for the kids to play. It was, making a space that just worked for them, that was colorful and fit their personalities a little better. Landscape design might be small project design. In this case, I was just looking at the front yard. I don't even think I stepped in these people's backyard because this was kind of what they needed help with. They felt like they had the backyard under control. So that's a small project. It might be designing in a really specific style. I've gotten to work on some projects that are more of like a cottage garden, and I've gotten to work on some that are super modern with all these sort of diagonal lines and modern hardscape. It might be construction details. One of my clients wanted a wildlife pond, and I said, I think I can design a wildlife pond. So this was just a super simple detail that I put together so that they could work on this themselves. It might be really large-scale planting design. This is one of my clients, so I designed this whole beautiful blob here. It might be solving a problem using planting design. So this is a client of mine. Their front yard, it's on a really busy road, and it was completely covered in invasives. So this was a lot of thistle and mugwort and things that can be very aggressive and really take over. And because it's on a slope, you don't want them climbing around in there, and you also don't want other maintenance staff climbing around on there any more than they have to for safety reasons. So the goal for this project was, all right, how can we solve this with plants? I don't want to concrete over the whole thing. So in this case, it was choosing some, really hardy and aggressive native plants. I referenced a lot of like roadside guides, like Connecticut Guide to Plants That Work on Roadsides. I read through all these documents trying to find things that really work and that were proven to work in cases like that. And now it looks like that. So fun.
No weeds, right?
No weeds at all. I've never seen a weed there. They signed a maintenance contract as well, so they have folks going out there and they monitor it too. I've been told that it has been very resistant to weeds, all things considered. There's always going to be weeds. There's always going to be, especially on a roadside, there's always going to be new weed seed introduced. Your neighbors are always going to have weeds, and it's just kind of the world that we live in. So planning for the fact that that is going to happen and trying to work to prevent any more work that is necessary. Planting design for aesthetics and wildlife value. So these are two different plantings that I worked on. One was in the shade, one was in the sun. And I think they look really beautiful. I'm biased. A lot of fun color and texture, but they also provide wildlife value. So, these are covered in pollinators all summer. They're feeding the birds. They're giving wildlife a place to hide and to live. This is in my own front yard because I don't have a lot of space. I think landscape design can be something even as small as container plantings, understanding like how these different plants work and the textures, creating enough contrast that this is really still legible even at such a small scale. It might be outdoor living. It could be a fire pit. It could be a walkway. It could be a children's play area. It's just making a space that works for the people who use it. It might be really dramatically changing your outdoor living spaces. This project isn't done yet. This is one that we're working on over the winter. Winter's a great time for hardscape, everybody. But they didn't have any outdoor living space other than this little covered porch, and so we went in and, the greater design includes a lot more plants, but we kind of started with the hardscape. And it's going to really dramatically change the way they're able to use their space. They can sit out in the sun now. They can entertain. This is not one of my projects. This is one of my coworker John's projects. He's our other designer. He has a bachelor's from Temple in landscape architecture. And I included this because I think it's so cool to look at from above, and he's very talented. So this was a project where we were really addressing stormwater. So this is right on, again, another busy road. And they got a lot of stormwater sheeting down, and it became really difficult to navigate this side yard. So this was looking at, all right, how can we create something that's beautiful, a way to access the backyard so there's some steps and a walkway, but it also manages a lot of stormwater with rain gardens and swales. So, why should you design your landscape? Why do this at all? Again, I kind of broke this out into site-based reasons and user-based reasons, but they really go hand in hand, and this is not an exhaustive list. So when you're looking at your site, why should you design it? So you can understand what you're working with. You can understand what the constraints are and what the opportunities are. So you can site elements appropriately. There are places that are going to be better and worse for your patio. Right off the back of the house, cool spot for a patio. Maybe 100 feet down, so every time you go out there for dinner, you have to hike across the yard. Might not be a good spot. It might be picking the spot that's sunnier or shadier, or is quieter further from the road. Selecting the right materials is another good reason to design your landscape. Whether that's a plant, picking the right plant for the right spot, or the right hardscape material. Again, sometimes, brick might be really beautiful, but in a really shady, wet spot, it might start to get slippery. That might not be the right material for that. I think one of the most critical things is dealing with more complex whole site issues like stormwater and grading. Anytime you make a little change, you're affecting the whole site. So if you're able to look at it sort of top down holistically, it's a lot easier to solve these problems and not, I always describe it as like stepping on your own toes. Like, okay, it's really wet right here, I'm gonna reroute the water, and now there's water over there. And you know, tied right into that is identifying these potential pitfalls before they become a reality. I always tell our crews this too. It's a lot cheaper for me to fix the problem when it's still on paper and I can just erase it or delete it than it is to fix it once it's in the ground. So again, it's a way to sort of explore those things. And then from a user perspective, you should design your landscape because it's going to help you create a space that's functional and beautiful. If it's just functional, all right, I can go out here and sit, but it's not doing anything for me. I don't feel more connected to nature. I don't feel more connected to the people around me. It can help you identify your needs and wants and incorporate them into your space. So again, say you were to just, I've actually seen this, people are using AI to design their landscapes. I hope I won't ever be out of a job. But again, if you take if you don't understand your user or understand your site and look at it as this unique project, you know, you can slap a 200 square foot patio in your backyard, but if it's not designed for your site, it might not work for you. And then this is, I can talk about this all day, every day. Identifying priorities, so long-term budgeting, phasing, and maintenance. Again, you could go in, you could spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a new landscape, but if you don't have a plan for managing it, it might not succeed. If you don't have a plan for managing your budget, you might feel really overwhelmed. A lot of these things, I think of landscape design as not just temporal, or not just spatial, but also temporal. It's not just planning for the space, it's planning for time. What's it gonna look like in 5 years when that tree grows up and all of a sudden your patio is shady and those plants that you planted that in full sun are now in the shade? So again, I could just talk about this slide for like years. So I wanted to run through the design process. This is like a super simplified version, but it does kind of follow these conventions and standards. So this is what I learned in school, the Olivia version. And I wanted to run through this again, whether you want to look at designing your own site or you want to understand more about the process if you ever work with a professional and you want to know what their process looks like. So first thing, understanding your site. Second, understanding your user. And then third, integrating those two things. So again, we're kind of looking at it as from the perspective of the designer. That might be you. That might be a professional you're working with. That might be you and your family. That might be, you know, you and a professional. So the first thing, and this is kind of what I always do too, understand your site, do a little bit of research. Look at an aerial view. So I'm using the property that I live on as an example. That's where I live. No identifying details. So using something like Google Earth to get an aerial view. Chester County has a site called Chesco Views, which is their GIS site, and they have a ton of accessible data, not just aerial views, but aerial views from multiple years, which can be really helpful looking at tree cover. Sometimes the photos are taken in summer, sometimes they're taken in winter, so you can look at the difference in tree cover. You can see how your properties change, which is also really cool. If you do a really fun project or an addition, you can see, boop, boop, toggle back and forth and watch the house get built. And again, it can kind of help you orient to north and south, and it can kind of give you a foundation for your base map. Chesco Views, I believe, and a lot of other GIS sites might also have information like soil mapping, so like the greater, what soils are in your area. And then again, my font didn't work here, but I said, we're going to use my house as an example. You can just imagine that.
I'm
So the
sorry.
first- go for it.
Can you review? Where do you find the soil samples? How did you?
So there are a few different ways you can do that, and I think I put in a slide to talk a little bit more about them. So Chesco Views is one of them if you're in Chester County.
Yeah.
I believe they have the soil map as a layer that you can toggle on GIS.
Got it.
And anyone you can go to, it's the USGS, so United States Geological Survey's web soil survey, and you can look up your property, and it'll tell you tons of information that probably makes very little sense about your soils, and then you find the little bits that do make sense. You're like, oh, clay loam. I can Google that and figure out what that means.
Thank you.
Yes, of course. So again, we're still in the process of understanding our site. So taking site measurements. Again, I wanted to kind of talk about how you might do this as a professional and how you might do it as a homeowner. So I go out and I have a nifty little laser, which you can buy at Home Depot if you want one. I love it. But you can also just use the, tape measure you got in your garage. Just measure out the house. You could use a 100-foot tape measure. I use a wheel. I also, again, like sort of from a professional perspective, I have other tools that I can use too. I have a little handheld GPS unit that I can use for marking out irregular shapes. We have a portable altimeter for taking grades, so I can see, it's 20 inches drop from the patio to the corner of the yard. But again, a lot of this you can do sort of DIY, even things like understanding grades. There are ways you can do that. Again, I could get into it, look it up on YouTube. There's tons of information out there. Oh my God, there we go. So site measurements. This is me. I ran through this process for my own property so that I could show this to you guys, so that's what that is. That's what my measurements look like. Everyone's look different. So grab a clipboard, grab a notebook, grab some pens, grab multiple colors of pens, grab your measuring tools, throw them all on the ground. Figure yourself out. Using graph paper or notebook paper with lines can be really helpful if you're doing a building to keep your lines straight. A lot of times I'll kind of sketch in one color and write my measurements in another. I didn't do it here, so it's a bad example. But again, it's sort of, I start at a corner and I measure, all right, it's 3 feet 11 inches from the corner of the path to the house, and then it's 4 feet to the window, and you just start to put in these measurements. And then you develop your base map. So a lot of designers are going to use something like a CAD program, so computer-aided drafting, like the AutoCAD or a similar program. There's an inexpensive web-based CAD program that you could use as a homeowner if you were really wanted to get into that. Or you can do it by hand, the old-fashioned way, which is the way that I learned it initially, using a scale. Again, this could be a whole lecture just on understanding scales and plans. There are some common scales, so you're either normally going to be in an architectural scale or an engineer scale. Architectural scale is usually a lot smaller, so that might be an inch is 4 feet versus an engineer scale, which is in increments of 10. It could be up to, I'm sure it could be 1 inch is 200 feet or 1 inch is a mile. A lot of times you'll see 1 inch being 20 feet or 50 feet or 60 feet. Again, YouTube. I asked my boyfriend actually, I was like, have you ever checked on YouTube for that? And he's like, it's on YouTube. Somebody's explaining this to you. So again, this is kind of, I put together my base map. You want to include detail, but you also want to keep it easy to read because this is the foundation for what you're doing. Always save an extra backup copy of your base map. Save a clean copy somewhere, make a lot of copies. And then these structures that you kind of outline become really useful reference points. So normally I'll do the house first and use that. And then from there I can start to locate trees using those angles and those points that I've created. And now that we have this, we can think about our whole site spatially. Ideally, you've marked out the whole site, which might be a combination of measurements and using something like an aerial view. This, I think, is one of the most fun parts. So this is site analysis. So now I have a base map, and I'm looking at my site holistically. And what am I looking at? I'm kind of looking at everything. I might look at the sun, so the aspect, the way the sun moves during different times of year and different times of day. I might look at tree cover. Again, tree cover changes throughout the year, changes the way the sun affects your site. Changes in tree cover make a huge difference. Rainfall, something that I can look at. That's something you can look at sort of on a county-wide scale. USGS Web Soil Survey, I did put it in here. So that's something you can do is look at a web soil survey, which gives you sort of broad strokes about your soils. You can also do soil sampling. I can always hype up your local extension office. I live in Delaware, so for me that's through University of Delaware's cooperative extension. Here you can use Penn State's. There are also independent companies that do soil testing. But you can take soil samples, follow their instructions, and let them know with their form what you're trying to do on your property, and they'll give you a lot more information to work with. I do this for my clients all the time, especially if they've had an issue like cherry tree died on the property, or they've really had trouble, growing perennials in an area. It's always good to have more information, and that's kind of what the analysis is about. You can look at wind, you can look at stormwater flow, so where is stormwater moving and collecting, what are kind of the signs of that. Circulation, how do you move around the property? So in my case, I park over here, and I walk down this little walkway, and I go into my house. I also, if I want to go in from the backyard, go around this way. If I'm working in the garden, I'm going around this way. Views is another thing you might be looking at. So views from the house out, views into your house? What does it look like as you approach your property? What does it look like as you sit in your favorite spot? What do you love about that? Again, could talk about this forever. And so now that we've understood our site a little better, we want to understand our user. So again, this is something that you can do for yourself. This is something that I do for my clients. So I start to ask about 1,000,001 questions. Who uses the site? How do they use it? What do they like to do? What's important to them? What are their values? What do they want to see? What do they want to change? You might not even have answers to all of these questions, but starting to investigate that can give you a lot of information. So for my own space, following my own process, I wanted a safe approach to the house, light at night because my neighborhood doesn't have street lights, native plants because I love them, framing the front door and giving an attractive approach, managing stormwater in my side yard. It's not too bad, but it gets a little wet, and then maintaining good views in and out of the windows.
I have another question.
Sure.
You've mentioned stormwater a bunch of times. I'm not exactly sure what that means. Like, I've never thought about stormwater.
Thank you. Again, I feel like a lot of times it feels jargony, but it's all actually easy to understand, I promise. So stormwater, when I say that, I just mean essentially precipitation. So, you know, whether it's a normal rainfall on a normal day where you just get a drizzle, or it's like 100-year storm, so a really big storm. And how is that affecting your site? And how is it affecting your site on a normal day versus a really big storm? How does that affect your site over time? So again, normal precipitation, normal rainfall or snow is going to cause things like erosion. It's going to affect what you can and can't grow on your site. So it really is, it's just precipitation, I think, would probably be the simplest way to explain that.
Is it how it pools or where it
So when
lands?
I say stormwater generally, it's how it hits the ground, where it goes. Where it goes is kind of the big issue.
Okay.
So there's always going to be stormwater. I cannot stop it from raining. It'd be really weird if I could. But I can control where it goes. That's sort of what I have control over. So a lot of it, it's not saying I'm going to turn off the weather. It's saying I'm going to tell the stormwater where it can go and I'm going to manage it.
Is this like when you would ask a professional if I see a pool of water somewhere on my property and obviously I want to move it, but you mentioned earlier, how do you identify potential pitfalls? I'm not sure I would even know potential pitfalls of moving that water.
Yeah, that might be a great chance to talk to a professional, even if it's just for a consultation, to say like, I don't really understand what's going on. This way stormwater affects the site has so much to do with the site grading too. So like, where are your high points and your low points? How steep are they, which is going to affect how fast that stormwater is moving. You know, what are your soils? Are they really clayey, so they're really holding a lot of water? Are they really sandy, so we're draining really fast? So there's a lot that kind of goes in. Stormwater can be one of the more complex things to look at on your property. There's a lot you can do as a homeowner, and there's a lot you can experiment with, but sometimes it's a big issue. Especially, I think, if it's starting to affect the house, or really seriously affecting the way you use the space, that might be a time to call in a professional.
I just did an addition in King of Prussia. They changed the zoning, and they now require a stormwater management plan for any addition at all.
Yeah, a lot. I've seen that a lot recently. A lot of, as we're sort of progressing toward this more environmentally friendly view of the world, a lot more townships or cities or states are starting to require stormwater management. As for new construction, you're starting to need to sort of offset your hardscape. So if you're adding in a new patio, where's that water going? That's something that I deal with a lot as a professional, because I'll handle a lot of that permitting and work with my client to do that. So it's something I think we're all going to become a lot more aware of, and I'm hoping that a lot of those resources will become more accessible to the public, because it can be really confusing. Every township is different too. The amount of times I've called, like, hi, so-and-so township, I'm calling from GreenWeaver Landscapes, I just had a few questions. Like, some of them will consider gravel permeable, so the water runs through it. Some of them say gravel's impermeable, and it's just a decision that they've made. Again, it's sort of bureaucracy affecting the landscape. A lot of times we don't have huge issues with that because we're planting a ton, so I can usually say, I'm doing a little bit of hardscape, I'm doing a lot of planting and a lot of grading, and I'm putting things into rain gardens, or I'm putting in, you know, bigger stormwater, whether it's dry wells or things like that, to manage a lot of water. So I'm going to stop myself because I could talk about stormwater all day. It's very interesting, very cool. So just kind of continuing along the process. So now that I understand my site, I understand my user, functional diagramming is where those two things come together. So it's a graphic way of representing the use of the space, and it helps you start to think about function and move toward form, understand the scale of space. So like, how wide does this walkway need to be? Where do I need to be able to walk and access? How much space do I need for entertaining? Does that match the scale of the house? Again, like, you can sort of think of indoor and outdoor spaces as being analogous. Like, you wouldn't want to build a patio that's much smaller than your dining room if you plan on eating out there. So just starting to think about space. Again with my font. So once you've done your functional diagramming, usually you'll do a couple different versions and think about things a few ways. That's when you develop a concept design, which I've described as the importance of divergent thinking, iteration, and looking at something with fresh eyes. So this is when you're still in the exploring phase. I'm looking at different ways of solving a problem, because there's never going to be one single way, and there's going to be different ways for every person. There might be one solution that solves 3 of your issues and one that only solves 2. There might be one thing that's really, really important to you and one thing that's a little less important. So exploring is really important. So I always think of this as a time to think really quickly and creatively. Don't overdevelop a single idea. Sometimes it's turning the plan upside down. Sometimes it's thinking, what if there was no budget? Sometimes it's thinking, what if that big giant tree in the front yard wasn't there? What if I moved the driveway entirely? This is the time to think creatively. It gives you a lot of really good ideas. Ask yourself questions. Why do I think this is a good idea? And I actually have an example of that, and sort of why it's so important to think really creatively during this process. And I'm going to take a sip of water, otherwise I'm going to forget. And I'm going to end this night really dehydrated. I'm going to spill water all over myself in public.
We can't see.
Nobody look. So this is an example I wanted to kind of explain a little bit about what I mean about thinking creatively. Doesn't mean you have to go to school for creativity and design thinking and do that exclusively. Sometimes it's just looking at things a little bit differently. And it might be reading a book that changes your mind about something. It might be getting new resources. It might be going around in your backyard from the perspective of a toddler. You know, get down this low. What's cool about this site now that I'm looking at it a little differently? So in this case, this is a client of mine who I adore. She called me out initially, maybe a year and a half ago, and normally the first thing I say is, "Hi, I'm Olivia. What can I do to help you? Why'd you call us out today?" And I let them kind of take me through the site and explain things so I can see how they're thinking about the space and what's important to them. So this client's really beautiful property in Philadelphia. One of the things that's extra cool about it is it's kind of terraced. There's a lot of grade change from the house down to the low corners of the site. So we walk down the driveway, we come through that little gate there. My client says to me, you know, I live here, it's a multi-generational household. I live here with my children and my grandchildren. And I think we really need a patio or an entertaining space outdoors. And I said, okay, have you thought about a site for it? Kind of explored that. And she said, yeah, I think this spot. And again, I'm still in the exploring phase of this. So I say, what makes you think that? And she said, you know, I'm actually not sure. I think I'm thinking about this site because there's nothing there. And I said, okay, why isn't there anything there? And she says, well, we tried to put down sod, and you can see there's actually a pretty clear line where the sod had failed because this is a really wet spot. You can see it's sort of really smooth here, which told me there was a lot of stormwater moving through and moving through pretty quickly. The soil's really compacted, and there's I think this photo was taken in November, but even in November, there's a lot of tree cover. It's really shady. And so I said, this might be the right spot for a patio on first glance. It might also be a challenge. It might be kind of wet. It might be, you know, a little slippery because of the stormwater and the shade. And so I said, let's just walk around the rest of the site and tell me what you think about. So we walked and walked, and so the area that I was just talking about is kind of over on that side at this point, and this is kind of up 2 tiers from that. And we're walking around, and she goes, what about this spot? I'm like, looks like a good spot to me. It's dead level. Not too much going on. There's turf, but there's lots of space for the kids to play, so it wouldn't really be impeding. And she said, I don't know why I got so stuck on that being the spot for this patio. because this is actually a really good spot. I can walk right out from the kitchen, which is right on the other side of that gate, walk right out here with stuff on the grill. And I just found that like a really good example of like, I didn't even have to tell her the solution. I got to just walk around with her and ask her to think differently, and she came up with the solution herself about what might be the right spot for the patio. So we actually explored both of those spots. We designed a patio for this spot, and in that low spot, I said, why don't we design some rain gardens and a way to manage that stormwater and deal with that wet spot. So this spot is going to end up being a patio. The lower spot ended up being sort of a shade-tolerant planting. There's a walkway that goes through there. We nixed the grass all together and said it's just not going to do well here. And we put in a ton of native shade-tolerant perennials that are also tolerant of higher level of stormwater, put in some rain gardens, put some stones in there to slow down the flow as the plants got established. And it worked really well. And it worked well because we did the process right. I didn't just walk in there and say, fine, you want a patio? Here, I'll design it. Here's your bill. And we're done. I said, I really want to make this work for you, and I want to make this space fun and engaging and functional. The final design. As you can imagine, this is sometimes the final step. So when we get to the point of a final design, this is where we start to get into things like details. So up until this point, we can start to think about materials and styles and what might work, but we're not going to make any decisions yet. We're still exploring. At this point in the design, again, I'm using the property I live at as an example. At this point, I figured out what layout I think works for me, figured out where I need lighting, I figured out what the shape of the beds is going to be, and at this point I start to add some detail. So how am I going to build that pathway? How much of a base material am I going to put under those stones? How wide is the pathway going to be exactly? What points am I kind of aligning it with? What plants am I going to use? Again, this property is pretty shady too, so I can't put in like a full sun perennial. It's not going to be happy there. It's not going to do well. In this case, again, I was talking a little bit about stormwater. So routing that downspout into a rain garden could be a really good solution to that. So again, you see it starts to reaches a certain level of detail. And at this point, again, it's still on paper. If I change my mind or I explore this a little more and I think about it before it goes in the ground, I can still make changes. And then this document too also becomes a part of my management of this space. So like, this is what I'm heading toward. Maybe I'll do the pathway one year, and then the next year I'll do this front planting, and then the next year I'll do this. So it becomes this tool for me to use. I showed my partner this presentation, and he said, that was a lot of information, Olivia. And I said, I bet these guys will be thinking that too. So again, I wanted to talk a little bit more toward the people who are thinking about designing their own landscape. You saw that and you were like, I should change my career right now and become a landscape designer. I want to learn more about that. Or you say, oh my God, I don't want to deal with the stormwater in my yard. I think I might have to hire a professional. So I want to talk to kind of both of those potentials and figure out how they might work together. Again, with the overlap. So if you're interested in residential landscape design, again, whether you're looking at it as a homeowner who's interested in doing that yourself or working with a professional, I actually brought some of these books with me. I stole this from one of my professors by accident. Jules, I'm sorry. This is, to me, and to a lot of people, like sort of the landscape design Bible. So this is Residential Landscape Architecture. And this is about the design process. So it runs you through a lot of what I just talked about. So it runs you through, you know, site analysis, working with a client, different projects. I think this is a really great place to start, even if you just flip through it or look at the pictures. If you're interested in design, again, whether you're working with a designer or you want to be a designer yourself. And I included a couple other ones, and I have a handout as well with some more resources, but Planting in a Post-Wild World, this is a well-loved copy. You can see it's sun-damaged at this point. This is a really awesome one if you want to think a little bit more about planting design and what sustainable planting design looks like. And again, I have handouts for everybody with more information. So a lot of the times, it's a lot easier to learn these things in a class. Again, I could teach a class just on design styles. I could teach a class just on site analysis or just on taking site measurements. What does it look like to work with a scale? What does it look like to work with a CAD program? So these are just a few that I'm aware of. I'm sure if you go online and you look it up, there's many more. Longwood Gardens has a certificate. Oh, this is perfect because you guys might get tickets. Cool. Longwood Gardens has a certificate of merit in landscape design. They offer a ton of classes. A lot of them are hybrid or online or in person. There's sort of a few different options there. Some of their classes are online, taught by instructors all over the world. So they have a really robust program. Even if you don't want to do that full certificate, you can just jump in and take some of those classes. Mount Cuba Center has an ecological landscape design class, and they have a few other design classes offered, plus a ton of, like, from anything from, you know, native plants for the autumn to maintaining your hand tools, like your pruners. Shameless plug. I'm teaching a class there this year. I'm teaching 2 on garden maintenance. One's early season and one's late season garden maintenance in May and August. Check it out. Sign up. I think it's $29, which is a really random number. And then, again, I was sort of doing a little research, thinking about my potential audience and what might be interesting to you guys. So I don't actually know too much about this program, but the New York Botanical Garden has a program called Landscape Design History for Beginners, which talks about sort of the design process and landscape design, but it specifically is looking at design history and styles, so like Italian garden design and what do those styles look like, French garden design. I just thought of another book I could have put on my list. So that one's online. So again, it's offered through New York Botanic Garden, but it's an online course. Hiring a landscape professional. If you saw all of that and you said that is all well and good, I don't want to be in charge of it. So there are a ton of different landscape professionals that you might come across and work with, and I just wanted to talk a little bit more about their skill sets, who they are, when you might want to call them. So you might work with a landscape designer, like myself. So I have a background in landscape architecture, landscape design, but it's a pretty broad spectrum of experience. There are some people who have done this for 30 years. There are some people who, you know, just graduated with a bachelor's of landscape architecture and are new to the field. So it's really important to look at their portfolio and just understand what are their interests and their specialties, what's important to them, are we going to be a good fit. Landscape architects, so that landscape architects are registered, they're licensed, they've taken an exam, a very expensive exam. And so they're registered with the state. A lot of states offer reciprocity, so you know, you might be originally registered in one state, but you have a license in Connecticut or something. Again, they are a lot of times working on larger projects. Some landscape architects do residential design, but they also do commercial design. So like, you know, a full neighborhood, a full development, office park, something like that. A lot of times they're working with other professionals too, like architects and engineers. A lot of times they're kind of the integrator between all of these different people. They might be the person who's making sure that the stormwater is addressed, working with an engineer, making sure the buildings are sited appropriately, working with the architect. Professional engineers, you're not normally working with these as a residential client. If you are, you might be working with a landscape architect who's working with an engineer. If you're building a house, your architect probably has an engineer, because again, you have to manage that stormwater, you have to meet certain requirements, you have to have your utilities designed. Having worked with clients who are building houses, so much goes into building a house. So professional engineer, you might work with them for something like a grading plan, utilities, you know, very detailed, like if you need a very specific stormwater, again, thinking about sort of these townships that are now requiring more stormwater, you might need an engineered plan. So you might go directly to an engineer, whether that's a civil or a site engineer, or you might work with a landscape architect. Professional land surveyors, if you want to get into design yourself and you don't want to do a full site survey, especially if you have a really complex site that's really large or has a lot of grade change, a professional land surveyor, they are also licensed, and an engineer is as well, and they can provide super detailed sites. So they're going to go out there with, you know, levels, they're going to go out there and shoot the grades, they're going to go out there and mark utilities, mark property lines, and then you, at the end of this, you have a survey. So as a landscape designer, I might work with a land surveyor if one of my clients has a really complex site and it's not something that would be, it wouldn't be a good use of my time to do that. A land surveyor can do that a lot more quickly. So I might say, let's work with a land surveyor, get that, and then we can work on the design. And then landscape contractors, again, is a super broad, might be hardscape, it might be planting, might be building a deck. Again, this is a place where you just want to look at someone's portfolio, understand what kind of work they do, what their experience is. I always recommend looking for their home improvement contractor license number, make sure that they're registered. Most people are, but I can occasionally catch these like fly-by-night people who are just, I'll come in your backyard and build a deck for $500. If that works for you, that's cool, but if it's important that they're licensed, you can check that out. You can always search those online. Okay.
You left out permaculture, very important.
Permaculture, that's another thing. So you can get certified in permaculture design. It's not a single organization that manages that and registers that. I know a lot of landscape designers who've taken permaculture courses, and if permaculture is very important to you, look for a designer who has taken permaculture courses and understands that. Again, some people are interested in permaculture but aren't necessarily a designer. Some people are interested in permaculture because they're a residential homeowner and that's important to them. So making sure that they kind of fit multiple things. If you want permaculture design, I would say look for a landscape designer who has certifications and experience in permaculture. Additional resources, so if you are like, I want to hire a professional, how do I find someone who's good? You can check Google. You're going to get a lot of sponsored ads. I always recommend the Ecological Landscape Association's Find a Pro. So these are people who are members of ELA, which is an awesome local organization. Excuse me 1 second.
Is that going to be on your sheet?
It is on my sheet.
Okay.
I didn't want to, I was like, why did I even put the links on there? That doesn't even make sense, but they're on the sheet too. So ELA is an amazing organization. It's connecting different landscape professionals. I go to their events all the time. I've met so many awesome people, whether that's another landscape designer that I can refer people to in a different area, or it's someone who does sustainable turf management or something like that that I don't do. It's a really great way to increase your knowledge. They have a conference every year. As a professional, it's one of my favorite organizations that I'm a part of. So again, they have a Find a Pro site, so you can go on their website and look up their member directory, and you can look up by area or specialty. And you know, I would still look at their website and understand what their work is, but they are someone who clearly is really interested in being a professional or part of a professional organization. Homegrown National Park, if anyone is familiar with them, they have a native plant resource directory. That's another really great resource. Again, that might be a nursery, it might be a landscape designer. They have a lot of different resources. Pennsylvania Department of Natural Resources has an amazing website. It has a ton of resources. So this link, again, it's on the handout too. This goes to their Landscaping with Native Plants page, which has a Find a Pro thing. It has PDFs on plants for different kinds of sites, whether it's, you know, I reference their information because it's so useful. So like different plants for different kinds of sites, finding nurseries and other professionals, check out their website, it's amazing. Thank you so much for coming. I hope you enjoyed this again. I know it's a super, super broad representation. And I'm really happy to be here. I love what I do. I love landscape design. I got in and out of it a few times because I wanted to learn different skills, but I always knew that this is what I wanted to do. I always like to tell people my very silly story about it is, how did you pick your major? So I got into University of Delaware. I'm from Delaware, knew I was going to go there. And I hadn't picked a major yet, so I went to the list and I just scrolled. And I was like, oh, College of Agriculture and Natural Resources, that sounds really cool. Landscape, horticulture, and design, I don't even quite know what that is, but it kind of sounds perfect. Kind of sounds like it might be the perfect thing for me. And I said, I'll pick that as my major, I'll start taking classes. If I want to change my major, I can do that. I'm a freshman. I took my first class and was sold. I was like, this is the perfect thing. I've always loved nature. I have a background in fine art prior to being a landscape designer, so this was like an integration of everything that I loved. I could talk about it for 10 years. Again, super basic presentation, because I could have gotten bogged down in any topic, but I hope it was helpful, and I'm really honored to be here. I'm a library lover. I love public education. I think that all of this information that I have should be able to be shared with the public, and I think you all have the skills and ability to do this if you're interested, and you deserve to have the information that helps you work with the professional well. So that's my spiel. I'm going to be quiet now. Does anyone have any questions?
For the folks on Zoom, if you didn't see my earlier announcement, if you're interested in the Longwood Gardens Pass giveaway we're doing, please put your name and email address in the chat. those of you in the room who haven't written your name and phone number on a ticket that's here, they in the back of the room here. Those on Zoom, if you'd like to unmute or type in the chat, you can ask any questions right now.
I have a question.
Sure.
What's the scope of your work? Do you also do just plans, or you
Yeah,
do everything?
I didn't even get into this because I could talk about it forever. So, GreenWeaver, we do design, we do installs, we do maintenance. So we kind of are like a full service company, and so some clients we work with from design all the way through maintenance. Some clients we just do design. Again, we do a lot of residential design. We do some, like, again, working with the township for smaller plans like that. We also do site planning, so thinking maintenance is really important to me. I think I've mentioned that a few times. So I do management plans for properties too. Some properties, they might not necessarily need a design, but I just went out and visited a 70-acre property. They don't need a design for that property, but they need help identifying areas for different kinds of maintenance. What areas are stable, what areas are being invaded. So it's a pretty broad scope of work, and that's what I like about it. I have some clients that I've worked with who spend $1,000 on a design, and we part ways with a great relationship, and they go and do a lot of that work themselves. I have some clients who spend, $250,000 on a planting. So it's a really wide spectrum of work. Our install team, we can kind of do everything. We work with subcontractors for the things that we don't do in-house, whether it's because we want someone with a little more specialization or it's just not something we do regularly. So, hardscape, we do a lot of planting. Planting's my favorite, I love plants. So planting, pathways, fences, decks, structures, garden structures, pretty much anything you could think of in the garden. We've done like custom, John, our other designer, he got really into water features, custom water features. And so he's designed a ton of these, and again, they're unique to the site because they were designed for the site. Retaining walls, kind of do a little bit of everything. I had a client last year who called me out, and I got to the property and was like, where am I going? I was going up. I did a garden design for their top floor terrace, which was extremely stressful for me because I'd worked with roof gardens before, but I wasn't the engineer on the project, so I had an engineer just give me, here are your numbers that you have to work with. In this case, I ended up calling the company that built the building and saying, can you get me the architectural and engineered plans so I understand what the load requirement is for this roof, so that when it rains, the soil doesn't hold too much water and I collapse their roof. So what I love about it is like I get to do a little bit of everything. In that case, I spent a good amount of time on the phone with engineers from a company in New Jersey, asking them if I can put planters of this weight on their roof, and getting answers like, I'll send you the document, and I have to read this and understand I can't even remember, I had to learn all this new terminology. But yeah, that's what I love about it, is it's pretty diverse, and I enjoy too, even when I don't have the right answer for a client, I feel like I have the resources to find it, and I can help direct them to the right person. There might be a client that I say, you need a landscape architect, the township wants stamp drawings, I can't do that, let me help you find someone. And directing them to the right professional to work with. Did that even answer your question?
Yes, exactly.
Cool.
Thanks.
So how do you, there's so many types of plants, how do you start that process? Once you have your little design and you kind of know I have this much space and this much runoff and, what's safe, what's the soil, where's the sun, how's the wind, then what do you do? How do you start with the planning part?
That's a huge question. Personally, I have an encyclopedia in my brain of plants at this point. So a lot of it, when I first took my first planting design class, it felt so overwhelming because I'm thinking about the width of a plant the first year it goes in and 5 years. I'm thinking about the height of the plant the first year it goes in and 5 years. I'm thinking about the color, I'm thinking about the bloom time, I'm thinking about the texture, I'm thinking about the color of the foliage, I'm thinking about the fall color. Try to make sure I have interest all season long. I have to make sure it's tolerant of the amount of moisture that's there. I have to make sure it's tolerant of the amount of sunlight that's there. If the sunlight's going to change, a lot of times when you're designing a planting, you're putting in immature trees. So the plants that are under it, when I put them in the ground, they're getting sun. But in 5 years, they're going to be shaded out. So whether that's a replanting or it's just including a few species that can kind of hide under the taller perennials, and then over time they get to expand into that space. So in summary, it's very complex. I think a good place to start is, say you're interested in native plants, go look at fact sheets online. Scroll through, see what kind of plants you like. Go to a nursery. A lot of nurseries, if you go to Redbud Native Plant Nursery, I always like to hype them up because they're amazing. They're in media. It's exclusively native plants. Their owners are landscape architects, and all of their staff are so knowledgeable. So if you go in and you say, like, I have a wet spot in the corner of my yard, it gets afternoon sun at 4 o'clock exactly, like they're gonna have an answer for you. A lot of sites too, you can go, and because technology has blessed us in this way, you can filter by attribute. So you might be able to say shade, native, wet. And a lot of sites will kind of guide you in that way. A lot of times, even now, if I have, you know, a lot of times, again, I kind of have this library in my brain at this point because I've worked with plants for so long. So if someone gave me like sort of a site, I might be able to list out 20 plants off the top of my head that might work there. But even I will look at like fact sheets and publications put out by places like Mount Cuba Center. So they do, type up Mount Cuba for a second, they do plant trials. So they will look at a certain genus, so all Coreopsis or all Amsonia, and look at all the different species and trial them in their gardens and release research. So I read that research all the time, and I say, they said Carex leavenworthii did really well in sun and in shade, it tolerated mowing, and I have that data. So it's this evolving thing. I love planting design. Again, when I took the class for the first time, I actually took that when it was a senior level class, but I took it as a sophomore. I don't know why, I just got really excited. And like the first day I'm like, what am I gonna do with this? My first design took me like 50 hours. Now you get a lot quicker because you have a lot more knowledge. I hope that didn't make that feel too scary. I think it's really amazing.
It's overwhelming, but.
It's overwhelming, but.
And then you have to maintain your gardens.
And then you have to maintain
Which
your
is
gardens.
another gigantic.
Yeah, maintenance is, I think a lot of times like sort of the forgotten piece of
Yeah,
landscapes.
the weeding.
The weeding, understanding how plants are gonna mature and sort of knit themselves together, understanding which plants might be higher maintenance because of the nature of the plant. Putting the right plant in the right place can reduce maintenance, but it's never gonna eliminate it. I think a lot of times it's setting your expectations of like, I'm never going to completely eliminate weeding, but maybe if I choose really aggressive perennials in this spot that are gonna shade the ground and provide cover, I'm gonna weed a lot less. I've worked on and lived on a lot of properties where that ended up being the case, and by year 5 you're like, I can finally breathe. You can finally take a break. So thank you.
Someone on chat has asked us, on Zoom has asked about the handouts. Can they get them? Can you email those to me and I can
I have a
email
digital
them out?
copy.
Right.
Yeah, I have handouts I will pass out before you guys leave. And yeah, if anyone else has any questions too, I have my business card. I can give you guys that. If I don't respond quickly, it's because this is the busy season and I like to give people really thorough responses. I can be like an encyclopedia email writer, so be patient with me. Yeah, providing resources is really important. So again, I have handouts. If you have questions, I do have to be mindful of the fact that I do this as a professional too. So if it gets to the point of a consultation, I might have to say, my boss will kill me if I don't send you a contract. But yeah, I'm happy to help and direct you toward resources.
Real quick, Olivia,
Go for it.
great presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, do you have a favorite tree, shrub, and
That's a great question. That changes all the time based on what I see in nurseries, what I planted, what I see in the yard, what I see in nature. This time of year, magnolias. They're all blooming right now. I've written like an insane amount of poetry about the fact that magnolias bloom too early and then they freeze and then the petals fall on the ground and they got all brown and sad. I love magnolias, Magnolia virginiana. I try to incorporate it on as many properties as possible. I just think it's beautiful. Shrub, I love azaleas. Jerry knows this. I love native azaleas. I think they're amazing. They're not right for every site. They can be really finicky. They're really difficult. They like acidic soil. They like it to be well drained. They like you to ignore them, but also pay attention to them. Again, this time of year, I say Fothergilla is another favorite of mine. That's a spring blooming one. Beautiful little, like, some people describe them as like candle-like. They're these little like sort of spike flowers that bloom just before the foliage comes out. God, I love plants so much. Favorite perennial is so hard. I love heucheras, coral bells. I think I like foliage plants. Exactly. I love foliage plants a lot because they sort of sing all year long. We can get distracted by flowers, but the foliage is really important too. Oh my God. I mean, I have you can't see because I'm wearing a long sleeve shirt, I have plants tattooed on my arm. I have Monarda punctata, which I saw for the first time when I was 22, and I was working weekends at a native plant nursery. And because I had a design background, the owner, who's an awesome guy, was like, do you want to just help me plant our display garden? And he just starts handing me plants. Just put them, and one of the only ones I didn't know was Monarda punctata, which is spotted horsemint or spotted bee balm. And it has the craziest, coolest flower. Look it up. I wish I could show you my tattoo better. I thought it was so cool, I decided then and there, I'm getting that tattooed, and I got it tattooed a few years later. I have stinging nettle as a tattoo too. Not native, it is naturalized. I think it's a really cool plant. It has boundaries. It says, do not roll around in me, do not step here. So I love that one. I also have a passion flower, Passiflora incarnata, which is marginally native here and marginally hardy here. Down south it grows all over the place, but I have one of those. I could talk about plants all day. I love them. I love all of them.
Say a little bit about trees that are dying because of insect infestations.
So I think ash is the tree that everyone's thinking about right now. So emerald ash borer is a huge problem. I have gotten a lot of calls from clients who have gone out on a first visit, and the reason they called me is because they had big 10 ash trees down, and their site is just insanely different. Trees do a lot. Trees do just so much for our space and for the environment. They help us manage stormwater. You do not know how much water they absorb until you lose a mature tree, and all of a sudden there's so much more water on your site. They're providing canopy cover, they're providing habitat for insects. Even when they die, they're still providing so much habitat for different kinds of life. So losing our mature canopy trees is beyond devastating. If anyone's ever had to take down a tree, you don't realize that it hurts your heart to lose that. It changes your space so much. In a lot of cases, there's not a ton that we can do for them, which is really unfortunate. With the emerald ash borer, there are treatments that arborists can do. Look for an arborist that is certified and does sort of comprehensive tree health, and a lot of times they can do that. There are none that are going to stop it, unfortunately. They're still going to continue to decline. So a lot of times with my clients, I ask them to get that pricing and see how worth it feels. If it gives them a few more years and we can plant another tree to get established that's more resistant, whether it's because it's a totally different species or totally different genus or different species or what have you, we're losing a lot of our mature trees. I think if I can pass any information off, if you observe nothing, plant a tree in your yard. The tree that you plant today is going to be the tree that your kids and your grandkids and generations beyond are going to live with. The trees that we're seeing now, we have decimated our trees. We are taking out trees left and right, and we don't assign value to them in the way that we should. Again, when we cut down a tree, we feel that emotionally, but you can't even if you were to place a monetary value on it, it would be astronomical. It does so much for your site. So protect the trees you have, plant more trees, plant the right tree in the right spot. Think about how it's going to mature and how the space is going to change and what that's going to do. One more silly anecdote. So I have a friend of mine, she's in her mid-70s. This was a few years ago. I was driving home, I can't remember, from work or somewhere. I was in the car and she called me, and I thought it was a little odd that she called me. So I said, hey Sarah, what's up? Olivia, what are you doing? Driving home. Could you stop by my house? Is that on your way? And I'm like, of course I can. Again, I'm like, why is she calling me? What's going on? I get out there and she goes, I went to the nursery today. Sarah, what did you do? She bought 3 probably 8-foot tall Chamaecyparis, really big tree. Or no, they were cryptomeria. She bought 8-foot tall cryptomeria. If you've never seen a cryptomeria, it's giant. It's not a native tree, really big evergreen. It can get 60 feet wide if you let it go forever. It can be huge. They're pretty fast growing, all things considered. She bought 3 of them. She lives in Swarthmore. She was like, I'm putting them in my front yard. And I was like, Sarah, you know how big they get, right? And she goes, I don't care. The city came and they took down my big oak tree and I want privacy right now. And she goes, by the time it's a problem, I'm gonna be dead. And I was like, all right. So I always recommend thinking about the people that are gonna buy your house after you, think about your neighbors, but I also had mad respect for her in that moment for saying, it's not gonna be my problem. They shouldn't have taken down my oak tree. It was like in the way of the power lines or something. She was like, planting these in my front yard. They're huge. They're already huge. But they do what she needed them to do, which was screen the front of the house. She has her privacy again. I adore her.
Thank you, Olivia. We have to end because the library is closing at 8 o'clock, but thank you so much for coming.